What if I told you that what Nico Rosberg saw in the 3 days of testing in Bahrain was not simply a fast Ferrari, but a car capable of returning Lewis Hamilton to champion mode? Because this is not about a fast lap in preseason. It's not an easy headline. It's about something much more disturbing. Rosberg, someone who knows perfectly well how a dominant Hamilton feels, detected a very clear signal. The SF-26 is not only fast, it is a car that does not punish, that does not force correction, that allows entering that state of absolute control where Lewis becomes practically unstoppable. But here comes the big question. Is this really the beginning of a new red era? Or are we facing a concept so aggressive that it can break as soon as it leaves its perfect window? The 3 days of testing at the Bahrain International Circuit were not a simple preseason procedure for Ferrari. They were a technical X-ray of the SF-26 under real conditions of thermal stress, side wind and constant changes in runway temperature. And the first thing that caught attention was not a spectacular time, but the absence of obvious weakness. While other teams alternated between promising laps and unstable runs, the Ferrari showed repetitive, almost methodical behavior stint after stint. Nico Rosberg was one of the first to verbalize what many in the paddock were quietly commenting on: the pattern. It was not a return with little gas to make headlines. What was truly significant was how the SF-26 kept pace when the tire began to degrade and when the asphalt temperature dropped at the end of the day. According to the analysis collected in the file, Rosberg detected something that only a champion can identify. The car did not require constant corrections, did not punish the rear axle, and allowed the driver to enter a zone of progressive confidence. And that completely changes the potential of a weekend. On the first day, Ferrari worked mainly on understanding the operating window. They didn't look for headlines. They focused on long runs, variable fuel loads, and energy management simulations. What emerged was remarkable aerodynamic stability in mid-corner, especially in prolonged stance phases. The SF-26 seemed to sit on the front axle more precisely than its predecessor, allowing rotation without overloading the rear axle. This has a direct implication: less degradation in the left rear rubber, key in Bahrain. The second day began to show real potential. Long simulations reflected a contained degradation compared to previous references. The car was not only fast in the first third of the stint, but maintained a stable pace when others began to lose tenths per lap. This points to more efficient thermal management and an aerodynamic platform that does not destabilize when fuel drops. Rosberg spoke of a structural leap, not a marginal improvement. That is to say, Ferrari didn't simply refine the previous car. It redefined its foundation. But here comes the critical part of the analysis. The concept of the SF-26 is extremely aggressive. Ferrari has pushed the regulations to the limit in terms of active aero and hybrid management. That aggressiveness translates into performance when everything is within the correct window, but it also implies potential fragility. If the aerodynamic balance changes in wind, or if the energy management goes into clipping on long straights, the car could quickly transform into something much more difficult to drive. It is an architecture designed to win, but not to survive comfortably outside of ideal conditions. The third day consolidated the general feeling. Ferrari showed no signs of collapse in changing conditions. They adjusted settings without the car losing coherence. And that was perhaps the most relevant thing: consistency under modification. In tests, many cars work in a specific setup, but lose performance when the platform is touched. The SF-26 responded well to changes. This suggests that the correlation between simulator, wind tunnel, and track is working better than in previous seasons. Because the concept of the SF-26 is not conservative. It is a car designed at the extreme of the technical regulations. Narrow platform, extremely refined active aerodynamics, and hybrid management that seeks to optimize every millimeter of energy deployment. That, when it works, generates brutal efficiency. Top speed without sacrificing load in medium cornering, stability in long support, and surprisingly controlled degradation. But the problem with extreme concepts is that they live on the edge. In Bahrain, we saw the car within its operating window. Relatively stable temperatures, controlled programs, no real traffic or strategic pressure. There the SF-26 showed coherence, consistency, and a behavior that allowed Hamilton to ride without overcorrecting. However, Rosberg was very clear in pointing out the big question. What will happen when that balance is altered by real racing conditions? The key is in energy. The Ferrari hybrid system seems to have taken a leap forward in efficiency, but it also works at the limit. If the energy deployment goes into clipping on long straights, or if the recovery is not optimized in successive braking, the car can lose a critical advantage. And when that happens, not only is top speed lost, The overall balance is altered because the driver begins to compensate more aggressively in corners to recover time. And that's where an aggressive car can get edgy. Another delicate point is the thermal window. In the 3 days of testing, the SF-26 managed the C3 well in long runs, but Bahrain does not reproduce all the calendar variables. Circuits like Japan or Saudi Arabia will require stability in fast corners with high lateral load. If the aerodynamic platform is too sensitive to changes in height or side wind, the car could lose that friendly character that so impressed Rosberg. This is the structural dilemma of the SF-26. It is a car designed to dominate when everything is under control, but not necessarily to survive comfortably in chaos. And here comes Hamilton. Lewis is a driver who, when he feels confident, squeezes out every thousandth. But he is also a driver who needs a stable base to build pace. In Bahrain, he gave clear signs that he is beginning to understand how to rotate the car without punishing the rear axle, how to play with corner entry without straining the tire. That early adaptation is huge news for Ferrari. However, if the car goes out of window on more demanding weekends, Hamilton could be forced to drive in corrective rather than dominant mode. And that completely changes the narrative. After 3 days in Bahrain, we are no longer talking about isolated sensations or inflated times due to low fuel. We are talking about a sign. A signal that Nico Rosberg interpreted clearly. When a car allows Hamilton to enter its control zone, the championship changes dimension. When a team shows structural consistency in the preseason, rivals know it. Engineers detect it in GPS data. Drivers feel it when they compare lines in long corners. And the SF-26 left a clear mark: stability, efficiency, and repeatable rhythm. The question is no longer whether Ferrari can win a race. The question is whether it can sustain a level that forces others to react. Hamilton, after these 3 days, does not seem like a driver in the process of forced adaptation. It seems like someone who begins to mold the car to his driving language. And that changes the internal narrative of the team. When a 7-time champion feels that the car is responding, he starts asking for finer adjustments, starts building weekends around his style, starts pushing development towards his comfort zone. And Ferrari, for the first time in a long time, seems to have a basis that does not contradict the driver but accompanies him. But here is the decisive point. The season is not won in a test. In Bahrain, there was no real pressure to qualify. There was no traffic. There was no wheel-to-wheel fighting. There were no strategic decisions in the rain or safety car. The SF-26 operated in a controlled environment. Now he must prove that he can do it when the margin of error disappears. If Ferrari manages to maintain the car's operating window on different types of circuits, fast curves, high loads, urban layouts, then we will see a version of Hamilton that can once again set pace in the race, control degradation, and manage energy with surgical precision. And when Hamilton controls a race from the front, he is one of the hardest drivers to mentally destabilize. But if the car shows excessive sensitivity outside of ideal conditions, if weekends appear where the platform becomes unpredictable, then the project can enter a dynamic of ups and downs, very high peaks, and abrupt drops. And that's exactly what Rosberg led on. The SF-26 is extremely dangerous, but also extremely delicate. The 3 days of testing in Bahrain did not confirm a champion, but they did reveal something much more important. Ferrari no longer appears to be improvising. The SF-26 is not a car built to survive. It's a car designed to dominate, as long as everything fits. Nico Rosberg did not talk about a simple improvement. He spoke of a dangerous connection, of a repeated pattern, of a Ferrari that, when it enters its window, stops punishing and begins to flow. And that, combined with a Lewis Hamilton who is starting to feel comfortable, is a real threat to the rest of the grid. But here's the inconvenient truth. The same concept that can return Hamilton to absolute control is the one that can destabilize everything if he steps out of control. Aggressive platform. Hybrid management to the limit. Narrow operating window. The SF-26 is not designed for half measures. It's black or white. It is dominance or vulnerability. Bahrain showed us the best possible version of the project. Now it's time to check if that version is sustainable under real pressure, traffic, qualifying at the limit, and changing conditions. Because championships are not built in controlled simulations, they are built in imperfect weekends. If Ferrari manages to maintain the structural coherence that we saw in these 3 days, Hamilton will not only be competitive, he will be a constant candidate. And when Hamilton is consistent, the championship enters another dimension. The 2025 season hasn't officially started yet in terms of decisive points, but something changed in Bahrain. It wasn't a wow. It wasn't a headline. It was a sensation within the paddock. Ferrari no longer seems to be chasing. It seems to be prepared. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.